magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworld.eldar.com. I'm Brent, and this is the unit focus video on Storm Guardians. In these unit focus videos, I talk about what the unit is, its role on the table, obstacles to using it effectively, and how best to play around those, as well as loadout options and an overall assessment of how viable the unit is for highly competitive play for those of you who are new and don't know what's good or efficient or effective. So that's what we'll do with Storm Guardians. As we dive into what they are, I'm going to lead with just a little lore because I think it's interesting. I actually think that Guardians are perhaps the most interesting elf models in an elf war host, with the possible exception of maybe the Farseers. Because Guardians are just, they're not warriors. They are regular elves who are on some other path. So the way craft worlders work is every elf dedicates himself or herself or their elf self to some pursuit for perhaps many human lifetimes, perhaps a couple of decades, maybe not as long. And it could be anything from like doing a lot of drugs and thinking about stuff, the path of the dreamer, to like being a weaver or being like a merchant, which is weird because they're post-scarcity, but it's a thing. I sometimes think in the shower about what kind of weird paths might exist on various craft worlds. Path of the wildlife rehabilitator or whatever. Now, because they lead all of these various lives, many Aeldari have at some point been warriors, but at any given time, except on Beltan, most aren't. So Guardians are just regular space elves, and when they are infantry, they do things like operate a lot of the tanks and artillery weapons, but when they're regular infantry, they're either Storm Guardians or Guardian Defenders, and Guardian Defenders are the shooty ones. They run around with shuriken catapults, and they have a heavy weapon, and they help you generate CP, and they're pretty solid. And if you look at Storm Guardians, you would say to yourself, ah, yes, and those are the fighty ones, the melee shock troops who want to get in close to the enemy and carve them up with all of those cool-looking Aeldari chain swords and Aeldari blades that are now all just called Guardian close combat weapons. You would think that, and you would be wrong. Although I think in the lore that's basically true. That's really not how they function on the table tactically at all. Their melee profile is horrendous, mostly. Instead, what Storm Guardians do for you is they help with objective control in a very interesting way, and they have a very situational combat role where they become weirdly hard-hitting in one very specific circumstance against hard targets. And for their points, as Aeldari infantry go, they're actually reasonably durable, simply because they have a lot of wounds and they do have an invuln save. They're not durable by like normal 40k standards, but by elf standards, as individual elves, they all die relatively easily, but it takes more firepower to kill this squad than an equivalent number of, say, Dire Avengers for the points. So we'll take a look at the unit card. Like most elves, they have a 7-inch move. They're T3. They have Guardian armor, light armor, so it's a 4-up save. They've got 1 wound, but they have a 5-up invulnerable save as long as their platform, their Serpent Shield platform, is alive. And that thing has 2 wounds. It can't be the last model on the squad. So essentially what you have is 9 elf infantry models that all have 1 wound with a 5-up invuln. And then you have a platform that has 2 wounds and a 5-up invulnerable save. And then you have a final elf with 1 wound and a 4-up save and no invuln save is how it shakes out. So the whole squad has 12 wounds, 11 of which come with 5-up invuln. The Guardian models each have the standard 6-up leadership, and then they have, because they are battle line, they have 2 OC. They're very good at controlling objectives. All right, let's talk loadouts. Every Storm Guardian comes default with Shuriken Pistol and a Guardian Close Combat weapon, which can be modeled either as an Aeldari blade or as an Aeldari chainsword, which makes the entire squad look like it's bristling with elegant, close combat, elfy goodness. And as I already established, it is not. Because, wow, are those Guardian close combat weapons unimpressive. It turns out, people, that an elegantly crafted space elf blade from the 41st millennia wielded by a Guardian is exactly as good at wounding as the butt of a shuriken catapult or your fists, and also exactly as good at those things, or as those things, at cutting through armor, because it is strength 3 with no AP. The only advantage that the sword gives the Guardians over a regular Guardian defender using the butt of its shuriken catapult is an extra attack, because I guess it's a sword, so it's quick or something. It's also sort of depressingly worth noting that Guardians with swords are exactly as good at fighting as non-melee aspect warriors without swords, like a Swooping Hawk or a Dire Avenger has 2 attacks at strength 3 with no AP. And we definitely don't think of our Swooping Hawks as a melee unit. This is not a melee unit, people. It isn't, except occasionally when it is, and we'll get into that later. There's a very particular kind of build, and even then, it's only capable of multi-classing as one. It isn't really one. You can, however, give 2 of the Guardians Aeldari Power Swords instead of the crappy close combat weapons. And an Aeldari Power Sword is a good weapon. It's only got 2 attacks, but it's strength 4 instead of 3, and it's -2 AP instead of no AP at 1 damage. So that's good. So you have 4 attacks that don't suck, 4 attacks that are slightly better than a shuriken catapult would be at shooting. But keep in mind that they've also got those pistols. So I guess if you were charging into close combat, you would also want to take into account their shooting attacks. Speaking of the pistols, 4 of those pistols can be swapped out for better weapons. You can have up to 2 Aeldari Flamers, which are highly mid, or as the kids in New England are saying these days when they're talking about something that is mediocre, Ohio. Sorry, Ohio, but I do think it's funny. I mean, I like Cracker Barrel as much as any other white dude from New England who occasionally goes to the Midwest, but there's a vibe. I kid. Ohio's awesome. One of my best friends lives there. But the Aeldari Flamer is not amazing. D6 attacks, strength 4, no AP. It has assault, so you can advance and still flame with it. It ignores cover, which is surprisingly valuable. As you may have established by having your fragile space elves in cover, because they always are targeted by things that ignore cover. And Torrent, the fact that you automatically hit with all of those attacks means that it's not horrible. But really, the Flamers only shine into like Termagants, and when are your Storm Guardians fighting Termagants? Or other Eldar. Other Eldar hate automatically hitting strength 4 weapons that ignore cover. And anything that automatically hits is obviously pretty decent for Overwatch. And so there's one build where you might actually find yourself using the Flamers and having them really count. And that's if you're running the squad led by a foot autarch. I was gonna wait and talk about this fun build later, but if you really want your Storm Guardians to kick some ass, you have them led by a foot autarch, which just got a rules update that makes it actually kind of badass. I think if you're running Ulthwé, right, narratively Ulthwé is supposed to run a lot of Guardians. You pretty much have to have a foot autarch leading a squad of Guardians just so you can have some ass-kicking Guardians in your list. And there's also a good argument for having your foot autarch lead your Guardian defenders. And I talked about this in my balance update slate video, so I'm not going to talk about those 2 options here. But I will expand on what it means to have a foot autarch lead Storm Guardians in a moment. You know what? I'm going to say something now because I'm worried I'm going to forget to say it later. I sometimes do that in these videos. I have notes, but then I don't come back to things. So what the foot autarch does for you is twofold. Once per battle round, the foot autarch lets a squad that it's leading, or itself, use a stratagem for 1 less CP. And what this ends up meaning really is that if you have a foot autarch leading your Guardians, your Storm Guardians, they basically, if you look at all of the stratagems in the Aeldari Index and then all of the general stratagems for the game, you could think of it as like they have this special ability. They can do one of these things for free once per battle round, and that's a pretty powerful special ability. So if you didn't do anything on your turn and it's your opponent's turn, the ability to fire Overwatch for free and just auto hit with those 2 Flamers and then have a bunch of shots with other good stuff, that's a thing you really might do with the Flamers. I'll talk more about the foot autarch a bit later, but I didn't want to forget to say the Flamer thing on the Overwatch. Okay, so the more important war gear option for the Storm Guardians is the ability to also swap 2 of the shuriken pistols, not for piddly Aeldari flamers, but for Aeldari fusion guns, which are mighty. They have a 12-inch range, the assault keyword. They hit on 3s, strength 8, so great into most things. Good into hard targets. -4 AP, D6 damage, but melt at 2. So if you are within 6 inches, half range, they do D6 plus 2, which means you could use a fate dice to automatically do 8 damage, either a roll of a 6 or with a nearby Farseer. Fusion guns are really fabulous, and those are really the things that give the whole squad its bite. That and the simple fact that they have the grenade keyword, which lets you use the grenade stratagem. And if you're a newer player, you may have overlooked this. It's actually pretty important. All units in the game have access to, or all factions in the game have access to the main stratagems from the core book that anybody can use. And about half of them never get used, and the other half do. And one of the best ones is the grenade stratagem. You pick a unit of yours that has the grenade keyword that can see an enemy unit that is within 8 inches, and you throw a grenade at it. And so you just roll 66, and every 4-up does a mortal wound, and that's pretty powerful. So your Storm Guardians, which have the assault keyword on those fusion guns, can make an advance move of 7 plus D6, and you could, for fate die, automatically go more with them, score a 6 on the advance roll or whatever with a nearby Farseer. You just use a roll of a 1 or something. Or you could use the stratagem that lets you do that. If you had an Autarch on the squad, you could have the Autarch help with that. But they can make an advance move. They get within 6 inches of some hard target, like an enemy tank or monster, and they throw a grenade at it. If an Autarch is leading the squad, they could theoretically throw the grenade for free. If there's no Autarch leading the squad, they're throwing it for 1 CP, but it's still worth doing. And then they shoot with everything, including the 2 fusion guns. If the target is very hard indeed, you can use one of your fate dice to guarantee that you wound it on a 5+. And then with the AP on the fusion gun, unless it's got a good invuln save, you're probably putting through D6 plus 2 damage, and then you did some damage with the grenade, and then you've got 1 reroll for Warhost to hit and 1 reroll to wound. So figure you're going to use those on the fusion guns. So it's kind of like having 3 fusion gun shots, not really, but kind of like having 3 fusion gun shots into the thing, which should enable you to get a wound through. And of course, you can always cheat on the fate dice. If the other option, of course, is to assume that with 2 attempts to hit a 5-up on the wound roll with 1 reroll for Warhost, you're probably going to get 1 through, and you hold a fate die back to do the D6 plus 2 damage. So if you get an average roll on the grenade, would be 3 mortal wounds, and you were to push through D6 plus 2 as an 8 with a fate die, you would be doing just with the fusion guns and the grenades like 11 damage to something that was like T12 with a 3-up save and 14 wounds. And then the combined value of everything else, right? Like all of the shuriken pistols and the flamers or whatever, you can probably ding whatever that is for 1 more wound, maybe. So this is that situation in which Storm Guardians can be weirdly hard hitting. They can put like 12 or 13 damage on a hard target relatively reliably if they can get within 6 inches of it. And if you have an Autarch lead the squad, a foot Autarch, to give you the ability to use those stratagems for free, you give the Autarch a fusion gun and a Starglaive, and now you have another fusion gun, but that fusion gun hits on 2s, and you also have a Starglaive, which gives the Autarch 5 attacks, hitting on 3s with a strength 6, -2 AP, flat 2 damage, and then 2 of the Storm Guardians have Aeldari Power Swords, at which point the squad does kind of become a substantial melee threat also. If you have the Autarch, the foot Autarch lead it, it's pretty good in melee, and it's pretty good at shooting. And if you give the Autarch leading it the Howling Banshee Mask, the entire unit has fights first. If the Autarch's leading the unit, instead of reasonably hoping to put like 12 wounds on a hard target. If you're going to throw a grenade, you can hope to put like 13 on. And if you didn't advance, and so you can still charge, and you've got the Starglaive and the Power Swords, now you can do 15, 16 damage to a hard target with pretty average dice or low average dice. Unless it has a good invuln save, in which case you should still be able to push through a good damage roll with some fate dice on one of the fusion guns. Presumably, if you've got 3 and you're re-rolling with, you should still be able to get 1 through. Maybe it comes down to like 12 damage on something with a good invuln save. Of course, the grenades will just, it's mortal wounds, so they'll clear the invuln. But that's no slouch unit. It is, however, if an autarch leads it, 175 points, which is no cheap unit. That's like a fire prism. So don't be too impressed with its combat prowess. And if you really like the tricks with the grenades and the fusion guns, you can do that same thing with fire dragons for like half the points. Fire dragons have 5 fusion guns in their squad that costs 90 points and have the grenade keyword and fit in a falcon. They can't run around with an autarch with fights first, but they don't really need to. So do not make the mistake of thinking, even though your Storm Guardians can be good, do not make the mistake of thinking that the reason to put this unit into a list is that you really want some badass close range damage dealing. Because while they can do that with or without the autarch, if you use them cleverly, they're not really efficiently pointed for, even at 100 points. Like at 90 points, Fire Dragons will be better into hard targets than Storm Guardians are, significantly better. So you need to be getting some other value out of the unit besides its combat ability in order to justify putting it into a list if you're competitively motivated. Which brings us to the thing, the clever thing that Storm Guardians do. They have the Storm Blades ability, which lets them make objectives sticky. At the end of your command phase, if this unit is within range of an objective marker you control, that objective marker remains under your control, even if you don't have models within range of it until an opponent controls it at the start or end of any turn. So until your opponent takes it away from you. If you're going to run Storm Guardians in your list, unless you're an Oathway player and you're doing it for narrative reasons, you kind of have to be using Storm Blades, because as a combat unit, they're just not. They're not there for their points, even though they don't suck. So there's a number of ways to use Storm Blades. One is to make the objective in your own backfield sticky, which means you don't have to squat on it. Oftentimes we want something in our backfield anyway to keep opponents' deep strikers out, at least in the early game. But it's nice to free up models to be able to go do the thing. Here's also an interesting synergy. So one of the reasons to have a Wayleaper in your list, an Autarch Wayleaper, which before the change to the Foot Autarch was basically an auto include, because Aeldari are kind of hungry. See, they're CP hungry. So both the Autarch Wayleaper and the Foot Autarch give you Path of Command. That is, if they're your Warlord, they get you an extra CP. So you want an Autarch to be generating CP for you. Before, we always took the Wayleaper because it also has Lone Operative. So it could sit on an objective in your own backfield, be totally untargetable, hold that for you. Your opponent couldn't shoot you off of the objective. And then it's got a pretty good combat profile. And in the late game, it could get aggressive, or into enemy units that want to get into your backfield, it could get aggressive. Since the edition started, it's been gradually increased in points. People are still taking it because it's still good. It has the grenade stratagem. It's just an all-around good unit. But now the Foot Autarch with this new ability is good too. And if you have a Foot Autarch leading a unit of Storm Guardians and they make the objective in your own backfield sticky, well, now you don't need your Autarch. You don't need an Autarch Wayleaper. You don't need something with Lone Operative to just sit on that and score it for you. Well, sometimes in some primaries you can't even score your own objective, but there's usually some incentive to hold on to it. So if you're going to have Storm Guardians, then you don't need an Autarch Wayleaper. And if you're going to have Storm Guardians, there is some incentive to consider having a regular Foot Autarch, which, is also cheaper. So that's a nice synergy. The other thing you can do is with with the advance move on the Storm Guardians, where you just like either use a fate dice, or if there's a nearby Farseer, you can use any fate die to make them advance. So they move 13 inches to get onto an objective in the midfield right out of the gate, and then maybe make that, or maybe even not right out of the gate, but to make an objective in the midfield sticky. If you make 1 or 2 objectives sticky over the course of the game in a way that's tactically sound, you're definitely getting your points worth for these things. And then I think I had mentioned earlier in the video that Storm Guardians are actually surprisingly is hyperbolic, but they're durable for their points as far as Space Elves go. They have the Serpent Scale platform, which gives the whole squad a 5-up invulnerable save, which is the same save that Aspect Warriors have. And then there's a rule that prevents you from choosing the Serpent Scale platform as the last model remaining in the unit. But this means that your Storm Guardians can be like kind of weirdly durable in the midfield if they're not in melee for what they are, for their points. If you get them partially like towing a midfield objective, partially in cover, making that objective sticky with their Serpent Scale platform, if they have cover, they have a 3-up save, and they've got a 5-up invuln. And if you have an Autarch Wayleaper leading them, you can give them Lightning Fast for free for no CP, which makes them -1 to hit. If you don't have an Autarch Wayleaper, an Autarch Wayleaper can't lead them, a Foot Autarch leading them, then you could just use Lightning Fast for 1 CP, but you'd have essentially 12 wounds worth of models that would have a 3-up save, -1 to hit, a 5-up invulnerable save, which makes them really robust against small arms. Like something like 20 bolter shots or something is not going to come close to wiping out the squad. And your opponent typically doesn't want to use, and even stuff with -1 AP. So even like 20 shots at strength 4 with -1 AP, like really good small arms fire weapons. If you make them -1 to hit, your opponent is hitting with 10 of them, wounding with 7 of them, and then you're failing 3 or 4 saves. You still have 7 models left in the squad, including the platform, which has 2 wounds. And your opponent isn't going to want to dedicate like real resources to killing your Storm Guardians. And it's 100 points for the squad. Whereas 10 of some Aspect Warrior would be more points. So they can be just kind of like annoying to get rid of. The most efficient way to take them out is to engage them in melee. If you have an Autarch in there with the Banshee mask that lets them fight first and the Starglaive, and they can potentially use Superlative Strategists to hit with Overwatch fire for free with their Flamers, like they can be really irritating for an opponent, which is fun. As Aeldari players, I think we all have this like minor derangement where we want our opponents to have fun, but we also like to be an elf player is to enjoy seeing your opponent say, "Curse you and your elf trickery, space Logos. Your wit is as pointy as your ears, or something." I do have one tricky little way that I like to run my Storm Guardians. I haven't used it yet with the, and I don't run Storm Guardians a ton, and I think I might now since the change to the Autarch. But the thing that I have enjoyed in 10th edition is that they have nice synergy with the Wave Serpent filled with Harlequins and Yvraine. That's actually an incredibly powerful build. And if you haven't watched my video, really, let's be honest, listened to my video on triple threat Aeldari builds, it's a recent one. I talk about why that combo is so good and how to use it. But typically what Yvraine and her Harlequin band is doing is moving in their Wave Serpent in the early part of the game behind terrain in the midfield, which is also kind of where your Storm Guardians want to be in the midfield, right? Like behind terrain to play an objective in the midfield or counter an opponent's hard target threat moving into the midfield. Like that's where they want to play. So it's convenient. They kind of want to be in the same place. So on turn 1, your Wave Serpent filled with Harlequins that Yvraine can resurrect that have both a 4-up invuln and a 5-up Feel No Pain, move to the middle of the field and hide in the Wave Serpent to jump out and really mug something in souped up melee combat. And then they're never getting back into the Wave Serpent, those Harlequins. So that you probably see what's coming. So the Storm Guardians then get into the Wave Serpent, and now they're protected, and you have another sort of badass, highly mobile target elimination threat, whereby like the Storm Guardians could get out of the Wave Serpent 3 inches forward next turn, then make an advance move and shoot stuff with their fusion guns and throw grenades, or not make an advance move and shoot stuff with their fusion guns and throw grenades and then charge. And if the Autarch is in there, carve things up with the Starglaive and the 2 Aeldari Power Swords, or the Wave Serpent can move, and you can do that next turn in your opponent's backfield and like clear one of your opponent's backfield objectives, or take out some hard to reach, like hard target combat elimination unit. Jumping them in the Wave Serpent after you've used the Wave Serpent for something else is great. Do not take a Wave Serpent to put Storm Guardians in, for goodness sakes. Because if you're going to do that, you kind of want the Autarch too. And if you're going to do that, now you've got like this 300-point unit. You could have the Avatar of Cain for that, just about. Or a Falcon full of Fire Dragons and a unit of Skyweavers, or like so many other things. But if you already have a Wave Serpent in your list, and you can get the Storm Guardians into them on turn 2 after they've made an objective sticky for you, it can be a really nice combo. Okay, let's briefly talk about obstacles to using Storm Guardians well, and then I'm just going to wrap it up. There are 2 obstacles to using Storm Guardians well. One is that they take up too much brain power for a 100-point unit for a lot of players. Like they're a very technical unit. They're not this straightforward thing where you just, there's one thing you have to remember about how they work. Like I mentioned that Fire Dragons do kind of a similar job, but Fire Dragons are just much simpler to use. You either put them in a Falcon or you don't. You get them close to something that needs to die, and you either throw a grenade or you don't, and then you shoot it with fusion guns, and you either use Fate Dice or you don't. Storm Guardians are like that, but not as efficient at it. So you also have to think about whether you're going to run them with an Autarch, and if so, how you're going to make that squad valuable for its crazy points by thinking about like the 12 different stratagems you could be using for free, and how you're going to fight with it in addition to making objectives sticky. And if you're not running the Autarch, you need to make objectives sticky, and maybe think about how they synergize with this transport in your list that you really only have in your list if you're running this one other particular unit. Like, it's just a very technical unit that requires you to think about a bunch of stuff, which can make it a tricky unit, especially for beginners trying to play 2,000-point games. On the upside, if you aren't running the Autarch and you make a mistake with your Storm Guardians and they don't really get the job done for you, it's 5% of your list. Who really cares? The other obstacle to using Storm Guardians effectively is just to putting them into your list at all. You have to think about the other things that you could get for those points. If you have an Autarch Wayleaper, maybe you really don't need Storm Guardians. You don't need to make your backfield objective sticky, and it's better to just take Fire Dragons if you want that type of like specialist shooting unit. The other consideration is whether you want to maybe just run Guardian Defenders instead, even if you are taking an Autarch. Guardian Defenders cost the same number of points. They also do something cool for you, and they're just a much simpler Guardian unit to use effectively. Unless you're running Ulthway thematically, you probably aren't running multiple squads of Guardians, so it's probably going to be a squad of Guardian Defenders or a squad of Storm Guardians. You could run both, but most people don't. And Guardian Defenders do something really cool. If they sit on an objective, they just get you more Fate Dice. And when the edition started and we had 12 Fate Dice, we didn't really need more Fate Dice. But now that we only have 6, and because your Farseer lets you use all of them, right? If you're thinking about your Fate Dice and using them effectively, probably you do run out of your Fate Dice during the game. So having more is great. And like Storm Guardians, like Guardian Defenders are an okay combat unit. They have 10 Shuriken Catapults. So 20 shots at strength for -1 AP is not bad. Yeah, the range is limited, but they can come out in the late game and do some real work, and they can have a Bright Lance on a platform. And they can also throw grenades, which gives them a not substantially different damage output from the Storm Guardians, and certainly better at range. if you have an autarch leading your unit of Guardian Defenders, they can hide on an objective in your backfield, mostly out of line of sight, like towing it, getting you more fate dice, and you can poke the Bright Lance out every turn and shoot something, and then use Phantasm for free with the autarch's ability to tuck it back in, and then have them get aggressive in the late game. Now, I don't think that's objectively better than the Storm Guardians, but it sure is a heck of a lot easier to think about for a new player. So I think that the biggest obstacle to using Storm Guardians really is that they're tactically complex, and it might just be too much to think about if you're already trying to keep track of all the stuff going on in your elf list. That said, if you are a veteran space elf who's played more than 25 games of 10th edition and already has more or less total knowledge of everything in your list, then it might be really fun to try adding this build in. Also, the models are so freaking cool. I love the Storm Guardian models. I love how dynamic they are. I love how bristly and fierce they look. I wish that they were better in melee. Led by the autarch, they're not bad in melee, but I'm like aesthetically offended by the weapons not really doing anything. But the models look awesome, and it's great to have a reason to put them on the table. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I just like Guardians. I just like them. I just think they're hugely narratively interesting. Okay, that is more than enough about a 100-point unit that's pretty secondary or tertiary in a list. So I'm going to leave it there. And I hope that you will like the video. I hope that you will subscribe if you've not subscribed, or leave a comment. That's cool. If you have your own ideas about how to use Guardians of any stripe, or you just want to tell me what I'm wrong about, some of you are really into that, that's fine too. It's good to have the conversation going. Or if you just want to say hello, I like that too. I hope to be back again soon with something new. And in the meantime, if you'd like to connect more personally, you could always get involved in my Discord community by becoming a patron, which I will link in the video description. The most basic version is only $3 a month, and it gets you all the things. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.